Welcome to the last Extension Quilt Club workshop for 2020. My name is Mary Pacey, and I am glad to show you something that I have seen and tried and have done a lot of reading about. This throw belongs to a friend of mine whose aunt made two of these 40 years ago with wool scraps. And if you notice, the lady used different colors of threads and sewed the pennies, what we call the pennies, onto a background, and then there is a same back. This lady also left the back a little bit longer than the original to give it more of an eye appeal. The project that we are doing is along these lines because I'm a traditionalist, and I did the 3 sets of circles, and I arranged them because a lot of times they're arranged in vertical or horizontal rows. These little things are called tongues, and one of the books that I found called the color part a lamb's tongue. And I have a lot of information to give you about how to attach these to your project. First, I want to show you some of the books that are listed in your resource list that I got at the library. This book is primarily using pennies, but if you look at the different projects, and Elise can scan over them, you can see that not only are they stitched, but they're also cut out designs, and then which adds a lot of detail. This author also made a monthly, well, this is like an advent calendar, but she made seasonal projects, which are these down here, using pennies on the border and simple designs for the front. Okay. This is the first project I ever did. It was supposed to be a pin cushion, but I already had enough pin cushions, so I made it into just a little wall hanging. It was a kit, very simple. They gave you everything I needed except for the thread to do that. Several years ago with the Kansas City Quilt Guild, I took a class from Becky Goldsmith, and it was doing wool applique on the background of a quilt. This is the pattern that we were given, and we had to cut out the pieces, and her suggestion was to cut a piece of vinyl or template, or excuse me, transparency, to help you get everything laid back where they belong. I have a problem with depth perception, so this is very helpful for me because I don't understand where everything goes. The one thing I will tell you about doing something on a quilt like this, your background fabric needs to be at least 1 to 2 inches bigger than what you're working with, because number one, you're handling a lot, and you can already see that it's starting to fray, and you want to be able to cut it down and center your design in the finished block. Okay. This is another project I did before I knew anything about it, and I was working on this when I was taking care of my father in the last few years of his life, and I left it at his house, and I would come, and I noticed that my snowman have dimension because the book never said to put any kind of adhesive on it, and I thought I had it laid flat, but I didn't. And again, this was a kit. All I had to provide was the floss. I used the embroidery floss for this, and my needle. It was very relaxing. I love handwork, and I think this is a very relaxing thing for people to work on. My sister-in-law made this, and all the wool that this is made from came from clothing that she found at like Goodwill or one of those places in Manhattan, Kansas, and she just put I don't know if it's flannel or what, but she just put some plain thing on the back, and she embellished it with felt buttons, hearts, stars, and then she did regular embroidery for satin stitch for the eyes and the nose, and added a lot of personalized detail to this. I was the lucky recipient of this, and I'm so glad I have it because I use it every January because I decorate with snowman. Here's another book from the library, and if you'll notice the word so many notions, every pattern in this block deals with something related to sewing. So if you want to make something for a friend who's in a sewing group or quilting group, this would be a wonderful way to get ideas. This book is another version of a quilt, or traditional quilt, with wool applique. The Dresden plate and the half square triangles and the border in the background are cotton. All the other details are wool. This is I've seen this more and more prevalent at quilt shows, that people are starting to use the wool on the fabric. This is not in the library. I got it at a quilt store. It has a lot of different patterns, and if you look at these tongues, they are pieced, turned inside out. They're turned inside out and appliqued on. So that's another way to use a wool applique technique with cotton. This is a book I found only by wandering the shelves in the library, and to me it's more modern because the author, and she has the patterns included in here, used shapes and designs that you typically do not find in a quilt. And the patterns are full size in here. Any pattern, you can use any applique pattern, children's coloring book, these kind of patterns, but when you use adhesive, you need to be sure that they're labeled as reversed. The patterns are reversed for applique, otherwise you're going to have to reverse it, especially when you go to letters. If it looks backwards the way you're tracing it, that's the way it is, because you want the letters to be facing the correct way on the front. And this is a cute little magazine or book, and she does a lot of pillows and table runners, and to me they're country designs. And you can notice that the back of the pillow and the background is cotton, and all the details are the wool. So the options are endless for whatever you want to do to make this. Good. Now I'm going to start discussing the outline that was included in your kit. The reason I wrote a lot of things down is because you can refer back to it without having to take notes as you're working a project. First, we want to talk about the wool. There are three places that you can get wool. Like I said, you can go to Goodwill or those kind of places and get wool clothing and treat it. One author in one of the books I read, she must have had a bad experience with this, but she said, if you're not going to immediately put it in your washer when you get home, leave it in the garage, because you do not know what kind of critters are inside hiding in the wool. But if you're going to come and treat it immediately, go ahead and bring it in your house and put it in the washer. When you felt wool, it needs three things. It needs heat, agitation, and water. So the easiest way now is to put it in hot water in your washer, and always include a towel or two or something that will keep it bumping up against something. The wool that we are using for those kits were donated to the Quilt Guild because two ladies had passed. Their families did not want to have to deal with any of their sewing room and the supplies, so they basically gave everything that was in a sewing room to the Olathe Quilters Guild. I asked for and retrieved the wool to use for this project, and the cottons are being used for charity quilts. When you get a piece of wool, since they were already cut, I serged across the cut edge on both sides, because my new washing machine does not have a filter that I can find to do loose fibers. It's also suggested that you baste the selvages together so that your wool does not get twisted, but it still gets agitated. And if you do it by hand or a big basting stitch on a machine, it's real easy to wash it out. If your machine is like mine, it automatically goes to a cold rinse. So I had to deal with that, and then immediately throw it in the dryer and let it dry completely. That should do the felt. What the felting does is it pulls the fibers together so that they are less likely to ravel on the edges. Another place to get wool is from a fabric store or a fabric supplier. And anything you get needs to be at least 80% wool in order to be felted. When you felt wool, it may shrink as much as 10 to 20% depending upon the amount of wool versus other fibers in your fabric. Flannel weight is good for applique, and you don't want ever to use wool coat weight because it's too heavy to work with. And suits, designer suits, the wool that are made into designer suits is too light. And the third option is what you find in quilt stores, mostly is hand-dyed wool that has been felted during the dyeing process, and you buy them in size of rectangles, and it is more expensive because when I talked to a store, a piece just like this was going to be about $10. So you don't buy yardage, you buy pieces, so you need to plan accordingly and not waste your wool. It has a little bit of a, and I don't know why it does, but it has a little bit of a softer hand to it, and it's very flexible. And when it's hand dyed, sometimes you get what I call the mottled effect, so the color may be a little lighter in one part than the other. This was in the kit that made that flower, and I couldn't figure out why we were paying $50 for $50 or $60 for the kit, but now I know because of the wool and the needles and extra things that we got with it. Okay, we've talked about the pattern sources, about using any of your applique designs. You can make your own, and especially if words or if you want a directional something, you have to reverse it before you trace it onto your adhesive. Okay, your supplies. We have 3 different basic types of threads. The least expensive is floss. I hate to age myself, but I can remember when floss was 25 cents a skein, and I think it's close to 90 cents now. The next least expensive is DMC floss, or DMC pearl cotton, and it comes in numbers 5, 8, and 12. The higher the number, the thinner the cord. Floss has 6 strands, and you will be using 2 or 3. If you want something to really show, then you would use a 5 pearl cotton, and because to me it's almost like rope-like against this size. And I do not know how to correctly pronounce this name, but the Valdani pearl cotton is hand dyed, and it's the most expensive. This is about, at the quilt store I saw this, the pearl cotton was $2.95 a spool, and the Valdani was $5.50 a spool. But these are made, and I read in one of the books or magazines, this comes in 450 colors, so you can really match your fabric color. Another one that's not too expensive, and this is sold at Quilters Haven in here in Olathe, it's called Cotton Petites, and it's $1.69 for the spool, and it's real easy to work with. It's real easy to thread. They're all easy to thread. It's a little bit thicker than either of those, but again, you pick the thread for the detail that you want or the texture that you want. Okay, the needles. Okay, here's a little chart. You can use an embroidery needle, which has a fairly sharp point and a good size eye. A lot of the books and patterns call for tapestry and chenille needles. And the smaller the number, the bigger the needle. It's kind of, I think they do that to keep us on our toes. primarily, most people use a 22 or a 24. The chenille needles are kind of special because they have a little bit elongated eye for the size of the needle that they are, and they're very, very strong. I started using these and I like them. I just got a package of 10 needles, number 24 chenille needles, and they were $10. So, but they're going to last for quite a while. There's other kinds of needles that the book has people have used. Doll needles for something like a pincushion where you have to go through because they're really, really long. Embellishment needles, if you do a lot of embroidery work on your project, and if you're familiar with the bullion stitch, it's like a French knot, except you put a whole bunch of wraps around your needle and then you pull it out and it stays kind of like a snake shape or something. Anyway, basting needles are good for long ones, and then the big stitch needle, it would probably really be good for the number 5 pearl cotton. Binding needles are fine but sturdy, and they have a large eye. And then I gave you the recommendations for the size of the needle that you're using. Pins. Applique pins can be used instead of adhesive, and I tried sewing a few of the circles together that way, and I realized I had to be very careful when I pulled on it so that I did not pull the wool up as I was working. I had applique needles. I loaned them to a friend, never got them back, and she's moved out of state, and they're quite expensive, almost $14 for a box of pins. So I do not use that. And then another reason that I don't use them is because I bleed real easy. I must have thin blood, and so I don't want to have to worry about getting blood on the project. But you're welcome to use them. Scissors, you need some snips for thread, something for the wool, and if you use the adhesive, you need paper scissors for the adhesive. So those are the 3 kinds. Freezer paper comes in the grocery store. It has a waxed side and a paper side. You can put this over your pattern and trace on the paper side. Then you cut it out, leaving about 1/4 of an inch around, and press it on your wool, and then cut on the line, not outside the line, but on the line. This circle can be used 3 or 4 times before the wax has been used up. You need a dry iron, so I put my iron just before it goes to the steam and press it, and then after you cut it, it peels off real easy. You can put it on something else because any shrinkage of the paper is going to happen the first time you do it. It's not going to happen after that. And so you can use them 3 or 4 times and do it. If you want to do more pennies, I would suggest getting a Circle Guide. And this one was at a quilt store, but you can also get them in office stores, and there's a variety of different sizes. So this is an aid for your designing. Okay, let's see. All right, marking tools. A Sharpie is ultrafine Sharpie is really good to trace your designs because it leaves a line that you can easily see for cutting out your pieces. If you were to do some decorative stitches like that little pillow with the lambs and the hill and stuff, a chalk marker can be used, the chalk can be brushed off. And I saw in a magazine something new, a Clover white marking pen that you iron to remove the marks. And again, you don't need this unless you're doing some freehand drawing and things like that. You need an iron that has steam to do the adhesives. Now, the adhesives, you have 3 different choices. I have never used this before, and Denise suggested this, so I tried using it after I used something else that a book recommended. Heat and Bond is now my first choice because it, number one, it only has one layer of paper that you have to remove. You lay the paper over your design and you can see through it to cut. And you iron this circle onto the fabric, and then when you're ready to adhere the other side, then you peel the paper off. This is called Steam-A-Seam 2, which I used because the book that I first got recommended this. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's a yellow, pale yellow grid, and you can see some darker yellows. The book says that you are to trace it on the ungridded side, so you can still see through the circle, and cut that out, pull this piece of paper off, and iron that side. Well, every once in a while, the paper decides to do the exact opposite. So it's becoming real frustrating using this. The other disadvantage about using this, and I didn't know until I tried it, was that it gums up your needle and your scissors. And that's why I have a little bit of rubbing alcohol and cotton balls, and after I do like a circle, I'll get that moist and rub it on the needle, and it even sticks to your scissors as you're cutting out your pieces. So I do not use my Ginger scissors when I'm cutting them out. I use a better, cheaper brand of scissors that cut more than paper, but that was the other one. And this is Roxanne's Glue Basted, and I did do several of these circles to try this, and all I did was put a daub. Oh, let me pull it off. Okay. It comes with two different sizes of points, and you just squeeze and the glue comes out. I don't know if you can, it's white on white there, but I don't know if you can see. But it comes out in little bits. The only disadvantage to this, and I did not do it right on the edges, was you have to be careful about keeping your edge flat, whereas the iron-on adhesives keeps it from fraying and keeps it flat. If you have problems with a wool after you've made the circle and it frays, you can use this Fray Check liquid, which I use for serging a lot, and run it around the edge. It dries clear, it dries soft, and it will keep something from fraying. But most of the time, once the wool is felted, it will not have that problem. Okay. And and I didn't bring it with, it's in your bag. I gave you a transparency sheet in case you want to trace an applique design like you did, like I did with that flower. Okay. Okay, in your kit, I gave you an 18 by 22, two 18 by 28 by 22 pieces of wool for the front and the back. Because I wanted to save as much wool, I went and got felt for my back because I wanted to be able to, everybody to have a top, nice color top. Now, you'll notice that I put my circles in an orderly fashion because I'm obsessive compulsive about some things. But I'm starting to loosen up. You could arrange your circles any way you want to on your runner. And if you, I don't know if you can see these, but I've done some different, I love geometric, so I've done some different stitches that aren't on your in stitchery list. And unfortunately this one will not show up, but I did some lines here out from the center just for a section, and then I did the rest of it. And again, I notice now that I need to pick a different color of thread. But you are the designer. You can decide if you want single, double, or triple layers of pennies in whatever order you want. Just remember that you only need like 1/4 of an inch a 1/2 inch on the ends, and I'll have to explain how we do that, but you need to leave a 1/2 inch on the ends for the tongues, and basically a 1/4 to a 1/2 inch without. You may do some embroidery in here, whatever you want. You are the designer, and I would hope that at some point you can send pictures to Denise so that she can post them somehow so we can see the creativity of the people. You have enough of the tongue pattern to make 8 tongues, 4 on each side. When I did that, they were side by side, and I thought, well, I'd rather they be independent pieces, so that's why I only put 3 tongues on mine. But what we're going to do is, right now, is you have traced your papers or your circles and fused on something, or hopefully, if you want to just pen it and try it, that's fine too. But I want to go through how to do the basic blanket stitch, and then you can use any of those designs that are on that embroidery sheet, or any that you have been used for any other embroidery project that you have. Elise is going to have to come up closer so she can see what we're doing here. Now, I'm right-handed, and having read form books and some magazines, I'm following their rules. If you're right-handed, you start at 1 o'clock and you go counterclockwise with the stitch. If you're left-handed, you start at 11 o'clock and go the other way. Really, I don't know that it makes a lot of difference, but the first time through, I like to do things the way the pattern does. Okay, you tie what I call the quilter's knot. You take and wrap your thread around your needle 3 times and pull it through, and it makes a really small knot on the back. This is different than when you do applique projects, where when you do applique in quilting, you start with the bottom layer and put the second layer on, and then you stitch that, and then you build up. Well, in the pennies, you build down. So that's why I had you do only 2 parts just to practice. Plus, it gives you a smaller area that you have to try to practice. Denise said she will be able to stop the video so that after I show you this, everybody will have some time to practice and figure out what the problem is. If you're righty, you put your hand to the left, and the process that you're trying to do, and I don't know that any of these, okay. Whatever this distance here between the stitches, if you want to be perfect, is to match this distance here. The distance down and the distance apart between the stitches need to be balanced. I am not that way because I like the folk art look, but and it's partly because I'm not going to be fussy about this. Okay, so I got my needle there. I have the thread to the left. I go down and I come up under right outside that circle there, and you notice the thread is behind the needle, and I'm going to pull, and it's going to catch that thread, and I like to do kind of a little tag to pull it over. Thread on the left, scoot over, go through the red, come up on the plaid, threads underneath, and pull it through. And again, I pull it tight so that it lays there. You get to decide whether you want it hidden or you want it to show. So whatever you want to do determines the color of thread that you are using. If you go over, and I'm bending it a little bit to get the needle in there, pushing it through and pulling straight up, and then I pull it over a little bit. And you just continue around. Now, I'm going to do a couple more stitches, and then I'm going to show you, and then you can pull it to the back and tie off a knot, which is a little bit different than when we get to the blanket stitch around your entire project. We do something a little different. Okay, enter, bend, slide, pull, and tighten it over. One more. Enter, bend, slide, and pull it up. Okay, and see now they lie right on the edge, and they're keeping the raw edge down. When you're done, you go through right where you are. Excuse me. And then in the underneath part that's underneath the two layers, I catch a piece of the wool, and I always look to be sure that I didn't go through the other one, and make a loop and run my needle through that loop to make a little knot. And then you tie it off, cut it off, and you're ready to start something else. Okay, this is another book that is not in the library. I got it at a quilt store, and it is very, very good because not only does she have the written word, but she has pictures. Now, there are two methods of attaching the back. One method is what I call the all-over method, and this has an adhesive. I'm peeling the paper off, and I will iron this on here. I cut it. I didn't want to have to recut, and I'll cut the edges even when and I'll press it, and I'll do that in a minute. That's a way to do this. I wished I had known about doing this because I was following this book when I did the sample. I wish I would have known how to doing it this way, because my table runner's kind of floppy in the middle, and this adds a layer of stiffness to your project. This is going to be a coaster, or a tea, what do you call it? Tea mug, cup mug rug. Okay, that's what this is. But again, if it's going to get handled a lot, you might want to do it this way. If it's something that's not going to be handled, then you might want to do what I call the trim around the edges. Okay, let me find the paper, if I can show you. When you cut out your project, she also cut out the background, a piece of adhesive to match the shape of that. She trimmed out the inside, leaving only a 1/2 inch. So you have just a 1/2 inch, and she's ironed that down. And you've noticed that she did not trim the outside off until after it was pressed to that, so that it would totally match what she was doing. And that's what I did with this little sample that I'm going to show another way to do it. See, this is a sample that I pressed a 1/2 inch of interfacing or adhesive around the edges. I will peel the paper off, and then it will only stick to those areas. If you'll notice on this one, after she has the project pressed on it, she takes the scissors and cuts the backing away. And evidently this must be like flannel, because you can see that it's already raveling. She's putting fray check on the edges before she does the stitches to the blanket stitch around the edges. Okay. A magazine, because these tongues were giving me such a problem. Well, maybe I should iron this to show you first. I'll go back to the ironing. I'm sorry. Are we on? Okay, when you use the adhesive, you need steam. I use a Teflon sheet because you never know when something's going to move and you're going to get adhesive either stuck to the iron or your ironing pad. If it's stuck here, I just run my fingernail across and it will come off. If you have to let it cool, and then if you feel it, because if you don't and you put wool down, it'll leave a shiny mark on this. Okay, this is the one where I encased the whole back with the heat and bond. I'm putting it on there. I'm going to cover it up and see if we got any steam. Let's see, how hot are we? If you don't have one of these, you might want these wool mats. You might want to ask for it for Christmas because they are wonderful little mats to have beside your sewing machine when you're doing. Well, I use the iron a lot when I do paper piecing, and you can not take up a lot of room and not have to get up and walk to the ironing board. Okay, so that is all done. I will trim the edges to the same, and then I'll do the blanket stitch, and I'll show you. We'll be talking about that in a little bit. This one, okay. I'm going to only do one end and one side to show you. Okay, I'm peeling the paper away. The Heat and Bond leaves a shiny, non-sticking residue for the adhesive. And this one, I'm only going to do part way up, and I'll explain why, because I'm going to use this sample for two things. But okay, I'm going to put that on there. Then I have my back, and I'm going to put the edges together in here, and we're just going to iron the back, the bottom half of it. Okay, now it takes a few minutes to cool, and then that will be secure. Now I want to talk about the tongues. It took me 3 books and a magazine to figure out the best way to do this, because this was murder trying to sew. As you bind this around, you have to go through all of these layers. And what I've come up with is the last ½ inch of the tongues I put nothing on, because it is going to be inside the case. It's not, or the project, it's not going to show. And I don't need any more interfacing. But on the back side of your tongue, you need to apply a layer of adhesive and heat it on. Yes, I will make something else with tongues, but it may be a while before I get to one of these projects. I like the look because it's traditional, but my gosh, what a lot of work. Anyway, the other thing I did was, if you'll notice on the front, I cut back 3/8 of an inch off the bottom of the tongue pad, the lamb's tongue pattern. Again, why sew through another layer of fabric or another layer of wool when you don't really have to? By only cutting 3/8 of an inch here, they'll still be a little bit caught when you stitch the pieces together. Okay, this piece, the tongue, goes on the back of, it goes on the back part, so that it faces the back, and it's going to be adhered to just the back at this point. That's a noisy iron. Okay. Now I'm going to take the rest of this off because I'm going to cover everything up. Okay, there we go. Put that down. And we're going to... Now, while this cools, I'm going to stop and let you thread a needle, and we can, whoops, this has to cool, get it to show you how to do the stitching. So we'll stop for just a minute. This is cooled and everybody's together. This is the top. This is normally this will be something different, but I was just using scraps. And I'm going to show you how to start, do a corner, go through all of this, and stop so that you can finish your table runner. I do want to tell you that one of the magazines I read, if it was something like this, they would have had a piece, and they said flannel, and another book said to use batik, but they would cut a piece bigger than this. And remember how we had the adhesive around the edges? They would do that, and they didn't say that, but somehow there was adhesive around this because after it was ironed, they would cut around this before they did the stitching, which meant you would not have to put, like in my case it was felt, but you wouldn't have to put another piece of wool on the back. But again, I was trying to use as little wool as possible so that more people would get a kit. Okay, when we start and stop a stitch in a project for this, we do not tie any knots in starting, and we do kind of what we do in quilting. We don't bury a knot, but we start and make a kind of a long tail, and you end up coming out on the end. By using the adhesive, it also puts, whoops, I went underneath. Okay, by using the adhesive, it also puts some drag on your, well, this is really a thin wool. See if I can get this going here. There we go. Well, nope, not quite. Success. Okay, and you're going to leave a tail. Oh, except I'm going the wrong direction. Well, I want to do a corner, so we're just going to turn it over and do it. You know, all right, I'm going to start over here. Never mind. Some days you know what you're doing, and other days you're just winging it. This must be one of those days. Oops. Okay. Well, still. Now I know why the kits have such thick wool in there, because then you don't have to worry about working with different thicknesses. Okay. We're coming up. We're leaving a tail. Okay, you're going to go down, come up, have your thread underneath your needle, and do the first stitch. And I hold on to the tail. And then we're going to scoot over, take another bite, thread underneath, and go again. I do about 3 stitches before I go back and deal with, you can either deal with it now or deal with it when you get done, but I want to show you since I don't plan on getting, okay. On this, I pull up just a little bit, clip it off, and whatever's under, it's hidden under there. Okay, now, when you get to a corner, sometimes you land where you want to, and other times you don't. If you've done any embroidery work, you know that every once in a while something doesn't lay right, so you need to go back and do a little hidden stitch. The same thing applies to this process in the same thing. Needle, threads behind the needle, pull up, and I kind of like to roll the thread up there so the stitching thread so I can see it. Okay, now I'll come back and trim those tails off. Maybe it'd be easier if I was here. Okay. this one's going to go right on the end. And I want it to stay more to the right. Okay, now this time I'm going to take a short one because I don't want it to go too far over around the corner. And you see, if I pull it tight, it'll go out where I don't want it to. So I will go back kind of in between the layers and come back up so that I can take a little teeny anchor stitch. I'm going to go right to the corner and pull that stitch to the corner. And I've undone one of the other ones, so I've got to pull a little tighter, I think. Pull on this one. Well, poo. Okay. The nice thing about this is you can undo everything. And go. Okay, we got that back. For some reason, it's just being stubborn about coming back out. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Poo. You want to stop and I'll get this undone and then I ripped it out and started over again, so we'll try this again. Okay. Now I'm coming up to the corner and I'm going to take a diagonal stitch to the corner and try it this way. And there, okay, it stayed. I didn't have to make an anchor stitch. And the ones on the corner are going to be small stitches to keep the thread on the outside smaller and in place. There. Okay, now when you do your tongues this way, you do have more layers to go through, and it's the same process. And sometimes it's as much as a punch because there's a lot of room. Now these needles are long and they allow me to bend everything back. These are the chenille needles. They allow me to bend it back. But it's the same process. You're going through the back and the tongues and coming back up, and you just keep going through the pile. Sometimes it's if you need to, this would be a good place to have to use a thimble to push with. And you would do this all the way across, back to your beginning, or until you run out of thread. And after I get off this tongue, I'm going to show you how to end a thread. I think I forgot to mention that if you buy a garment from to recycle to the wool, I would remove the buttons, anything that could snag the wool as it's being washed, because usually wool is dry cleaned and they don't have that much agitation. So buttons, buckles, those kind of things I would remove before putting it in the washing machine. Okay, I'll do a couple more, and then I think I caught one of those stitches up there. Okay, I'm going to quit before I have no thread to work with. Turn it over, and on the back of that stitch, make a circle and go through the circle. And I like to hold my needle down here because I want the knot clear on the back, not on the top. And this is decided there. Okay, the knot's right there on the back. Then you take your thread, and again, I kind of go where I've been, and you're going to run it through. And I missed. Okay. And come up like you did with when you began. You're going to come up. That's another advantage of these chenille needles. They're kind of long. Okay, I'm going to pull on it just a tad, snip it close, and it's hidden. And this one, I'm going to pull on it just a stab, pull, and it's gone. And you'll just continue your way around. I hope you enjoy this and continue to do more. I would like to now show you what you get in a pattern and some pictures of projects that I got out of magazines. So we'll clear the table and start again. These are two kits that I have purchased and have not done. This kit came with the wool, and you can see that everything is here, and this piece is like a batik. It's not a wool for the tags for the letters. And this background is cotton also. So the only wool is the letters and the dots. And if you'll notice, I guess it's easier if I take it out of the plastic. If you'll notice, there's a lot of embroidery work to make the evergreen behind there. So you can buy them with, and that was $34 for the fabric and the pattern. And this one, I don't have a price on, sorry. This one is only the pattern and no wool, and they tell you how much of each fabric you need, and there's no rule that says if you don't have the background as wool that you can't substitute, like this one, use the black cotton. Okay. This is a very good magazine, and I have taken it for years and years. I've only made a few quilts out of some of their designs, but they always have rug hooking, quilting, and wool applique projects with directions and the patterns. So that's a good one to have. During the lockdown, I was going through magazines that I no longer wanted, and because I knew I was going to be teaching this class at some point, and I found some ideas of projects. These are little, I call them like gift tags, and they're just little snowmen, and you can either use felt for the nose, or you can do the satin stitch. This is a leaf for the fall. Now, I've done something like this out of felt because felt works the same way, that it doesn't fray, because at that point I wasn't into wool, and I've done something like this, and it has served me well every fall to get it out for the Thanksgiving table. Here's one with for fall again, and they've got the lamb's tongues and the regular tongues, and it's in a circle. This one was just a fall scene, and again, it could very well be on cotton for the border, and just the pumpkin and the flowers and the crow. And this one is definitely on a pieced background, because you can see that the beiges are different beiges, and then they've done a border. If you want to do something small, here's two different types of ornaments that you can make with wool. And there's nothing to say that you can't do the same thing with felt. So I hope you've enjoyed this. And I would like to we're going to stop and point out the quilt, because I'll tell you about that in a minute. This is a quilt that I will be teaching in February. It's called the Bullseye Quilt, and it's a wonderful quilt to use up scraps. The biggest piece is a 9-inch square, and then a 9-inch square there, piece that you can kind of circle out. It has 3 different sizes of circles. It's a good way to use up ugly fabric. It's a good way to use up small bits and pieces. I have 2 other versions of this pattern that I've made, and I'm in the process of making a 3rd version that I will be able to show you in February. So check back in January to sign up for the February class. Thanks for listening to me, and this is a pre-recorded Zoom meeting, but I will be on the Zoom apparatus so that I can answer questions that anybody has. Thanks for viewing.